All right, so Lawrence, first, let me thank you so much for agreeing to meet with us today. I know that students were really excited to hear from you and really enjoyed reading your work. Can you start by introducing yourself and your work to us?
Sure. My name's Lawrence Abbott. I'm a lecturer in the critical writing program at the University of Pennsylvania. I got my PhD in English from Penn, and I've been teaching in the writing program there for 25 years now. Um, in terms of my own research, it's been varied over the years. Mainly, I study 20th century popular literature and culture. I developed an early interest in comics, and in fact, comics was the subject of my first published scholarly work. It was a formalist study of comics way back in 1986, before there was even a discipline of comic studies. And today, thanks to the way that Penn's writing program is set up, instructors can teach courses with subject matter from their own disciplines. So I've been fortunate to be able to teach courses not only on comics over the years, but on a lot of 20th century literature and popular culture subjects. Right now I'm teaching a course on rhetoric in modern media. So that's pretty much my professional bio.
So we've got like a little bit of an inkling of the origin story then of the research on comics. Can you speak a little bit more about how you came to be interested in instructional comics specifically?
Uh, sure. When I became aware of that special issue on instructional comics for Technical Communication Quarterly, I jumped on the chance to see if I could contribute because of my ongoing work, which at that time was with gender in media. Traditionally, the study of gender in comics has followed along feminist lines, and I was interested in taking that toward a more formalist approach, more in line of what I've done with comics in the past. But of course, there's that great intersection of formal analysis with the feminist gender paradigm. So I think it worked out very well. As far as instructional comics go, I'd never really singled them out for special attention, but as it turns out, I think they were perfect for this type of analysis. And I could also bring in historical and queer perspectives as well.
So my next question in here did jump into that gender piece, and I'm just going to go ahead and read it through because I wrote a relatively long one here. So, are you able to talk about um, the reception and effect and impact of gender in instructional comics? So we had, folks love to ask about authorial intent and maybe more than that kind of rhetorical effect that we might focus on in rhetoric and writing programs more. We also had students who are asking questions about instructional comics effect in breaking down discrimination amongst marginalised individuals to address transphobia, and really focusing in on that impact on wider society more than on the individual reader, which is where your focus was a bit more in the article.
Uh, yeah, well, that's a big question.
It's a big question.
Yeah, well, to the extent that gendering in instructional comics has drawn from cultural value norms, I think the reception has been historically very good. Gendering is a form of rhetorical appeal that's always been effective. As far as social influence goes, I can only hope that the future sees this breakdown of discrimination that you're referring to. But I think there is a strong ray of hope, and it's attached to this general increase in awareness socially, even though there are voices of resistance. And one example that I can mention, I think that illustrates this kind of social initiative in comics, is a graphic novel I recently came across. Maybe you're familiar with it, by Rebecca Burgess, called How to Be Ace. it's a personal history of her experiences growing up asexual. So it follows this autobiographical form. It's not unlike Fun Home by
Mhm.
Alison Bechdel. But the very fact that she titles her book How To suggests that she's seeing her personal history as instructional.
Mhm.
I think this example nicely connects personal and social impacts, and I'd hazard a guess that this was her intention as an autobiographer. And also, since it's a graphic novel, you have all the affordances of comics working toward this social as well as personal goal, through this autobiography. So, yes, I think instructional comics have this power, have this potential, and we're already seeing it happening.
Yeah, when you and I were emailing, we were talking about the challenges of kind of representing, for example, non-binary bodies and not really having as easy mechanisms for flagging it as in that switch in language from like pregnant women to pregnant people. Um, yeah, but as you say, right, folks are finding ways and are inventing uh, the ways to do those things. I've written that one down because I have a TA working with me this semester who is studying ace literature, and she'll be very excited to. She'll probably actually already know about it, but nice to have one to recommend anyway.
Yeah.
Um, so the narrative question, we have a lot of creative writers who take my course. This is positioned in that master's in creative writing and publishing. We've got a lot of interest in narrative. Can you give us your take on narrative and the comics format?
Yeah, that's a big topic for me personally. It was the subject of my first scholarly work in comics, and it's been percolating with me in various ways over the years. When I first got into studying comics from an aesthetic perspective, I just assumed that comics were narrative by nature. It's all I'd ever seen. In fact, I used the word narrative medium in the title of my article. And at that time, there were only a few people in the US writing about comics from a formalist perspective in the mid 80s.
Mhm.
And it seems we all had this same assumption. Um, there was Will Eisner, the comics legend with his sequential art in 1985. There was another cartoonist, R.C. Harvey, who was crossing into the academic sphere with narrative aspect in comics. In fact, Harvey is really underappreciated because he, I think, was the first person to write a scholarly study of comics aesthetics in English way back in 1979. Before that, it was mostly the French and the Germans who were writing about formalist studies of comics. Um, I was actually a cartoonist back in my college days. So I think that in the 80s, we were all sort of like John the Baptist crying in the wilderness about this potential of comics to be more than just children's literature. And it was because we were involved in the art ourselves and we saw the potential of this wonderful visual narrative medium, you know?
Mhm.
And then Jesus came along. In other words, Scott McCloud in 1993 with Understanding Comics. And he also took as a given that comics were a narrative medium. And understanding comics, I mean, that was the New Testament. That gave birth to the religion of comic studies. Now, a lot has happened since then. A whole field of study has developed. Today, I and a lot of others have expanded our views on what comics can be, especially as far as narrativity goes. Things like poetry comics, the French Ubapo movement, challenging the very nature of comics. I embrace this larger perspective, but that doesn't mean that existing comics aren't largely narrative. And I don't think narrative is going to go away anytime soon because, frankly, that's what comics do very well. So my message to anybody interested in narrative in comics is that this is really the heart of comics. It's always been the heart of comics. And I think that in fields of technical communication, that is just as has just as strong potential as in the entertainment end of comics.
Well, that's it, right? Narrative doesn't have to be like just narrative. It can serve so many other purposes. Whether it is in instruction. I was thinking as you were speaking about Nick Susanas's comic graphic novel dissertation, which is narrative and also a thesis. Yeah. So I'm not sure whether this really is a separate question or whether it continues on. That narrative is, as you say, right, a core part. It's something that comics do really well. All the way up from those kind of like little snapshots, little comic strips, all the way up through to long form comics or graphic novels. And I wrote in the question that narrative is really at the fore in those longer form documents. And I'm now wondering whether I was actually wrong when I framed it that way, whether narrative is more important in those. You can tell me that. But the question there was around in these ones where narrative seems to be at the front, long form comics, graphic novels.
Mhm.
Do you see instructional elements having the potential to enhance the narrative, to extend the narrative in interesting ways? So rather than narrative in the service of instructions, instructions in the service of narrative?
Well, that's very interesting. I mentioned Rebecca Burgess's graphic novel, How to Be Ace, and I think it's a great role model for this because it's largely narrative, but sometimes she breaks the fourth wall and goes into a kind of educational mode, defining asexuality, and there is a kind of hybrid approach. This might be a good time to bring up the idea that instructional comics really do have this broad application. There's that scholar Han Yu who literally wrote the book on instructional comics, and she identifies 4 different types. You have your how-to instructions as one, but then you have what she calls developmental comics, educational comics, and propaganda comics.
Mm-hmm.
The how-to type in its simplest form is very diagrammatic, like IKEA furniture instructions or Lego instructions.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important to realize that although Burgess titles her book How To, she's really looking at another more sophisticated type of developmental comics. And I think that's heavily dependent on narrative, not solely dependent on narrative, though. And it is very interesting in that graphic novel how seamlessly she can move from like a personal narrative, memoir style thing like Fun Home to these educational outtakes.
Really operating as a kind of testimony. Lived experiences, knowledge making, and as a model, right?
Yeah.
That you have to be able to see things to be able to represent, like the big representation argument. You have to be able to see it to be able to be it.
right, visualize. I think this is something I could have brought out more explicitly in my article. For example, those two tampon insertion comics, the one from the 1940s and the other from the 1990s. The 1940s one was very diagrammatic. That was its instructional space, whereas the 90s uh, American Girl instruction shifted to narrative form.
Mhm,
So for all the various socially driven differences of the two, there was also that formal shift as well. And I think anybody who's working today with instructional comics uh, ought to be aware that you have both of those tools at your disposal. You
mhm.
know, it's a rich palette to draw from.
A nice segue to the next question, which was, what would your advice be to an emerging technical writer looking to use or compose comics as part of their work?
Okay, my advice would be well, I think to see what's out there, see what's being done. And then I really think you can use your instincts. I mean, if you are inclined to be a technical writer who wants to experiment with comics, you're half the way there. You don't really need to be a great artist anymore to draw comics. That naive amateur style is considered okay these days, and it can even be message enhancing. And there's also the option of writers collaborating with artists. So I think there is no reason why technical writers who are tasked with creating instructional literature shouldn't consider comics.
I'm gonna put you on the spot on this one. But having heard you speak more about your background in kind of the literary studies end of writing and communication, um, creative writers thinking about experimenting with comics, what advice might you have for them?
Um, I think that, again, anyone who maybe visualizes their story and wants to bring that visualization in. Writers often eschew visualization because they want to create mental images with words.
Mhm,
But writers who are, say, motivated in the other direction to let visual images supply a kind of mental text in the reader's minds, ought to dive in. Again, um, if you have moderate art skills, then go for it. There are plenty of manuals on how to create comics, how to lay out pages and things, and a little bit of study of those might help. But then there's also collaboration with artists, and you can go online and you can find people on LinkedIn, for example, advertising their art services, and I think that. Uh, the potential is there, and anybody inclined to do it ought to give it a try, whether it's in the technical sphere or for creative writers.
mhm,
You know, bringing their stories to that new medium of the graphic novel. Uh,
mhm.
and I understand that publishers and literary agents are hungry for graphic novels, to discover that new uh, graphic novelist.
So, kind of heading towards the end. This article appeared as we talked about a special issue: comics, visual storytelling, technical communication. To this day, my favorite special issue announcement ever when they released the comic announcement of everything that was going to be in that. Uh, that issue. We do have that existing field of comic studies, but this was really kind of the first one for technical communication, um,
Mhm.
which we often see as sort of that maybe a springboard. It starts to collect people together, can form the starts of ongoing community and collaboration. Um, uh, so looking ahead in the next 5 to 10 years, what changes do you expect to see? I'm happy for you to split out technical communication comics if that's and comics into two things if that makes more sense. But what changes would you expect to see in research and practice?
Well, I don't have a crystal ball, but personally, I
Don't
think,
we?
yeah, if we just go by what is currently happening, I think that you'll see an increase in those developmental kinds of awareness raising comics. I see this happening in web comics. There are sites like thenib.com that really feature a lot of great artists producing that kind of work. And I think there's and now we're just talking about comics in the form of static images. And I think there's also an offshoot of comics in video form, where you have drawn images in sequence, not moving animation, but drawn images in sequence with background narration, maybe a minimum amount of moving, but essentially they're borrowing a lot from the comics medium, and they have great platforms now. YouTube is filled with these sort of video related comic instructions. You can see everything from instructions on how to do various things to PSAs from nonprofit organizations, and they all kind of use a video expansion of the comics, basic characteristic of images in sequence. So
Mhm.
maybe that is a direction that's going to continue. I mean, it's already here, but I think it's going to grow.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. I think I see it as well with I'm thinking about the Instagram, almost a slideshow.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
like a slideshow. Correct.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah, and the way that the Instagram 10 photos in a row has been taken up in that, in, yeah, sometimes actually very comic-y, narrative-y, sometimes very much like didactic PowerPoint. Um, yeah.
Yeah, and I think the comics aspect that goes beyond the PowerPoint is that you do have that sequential, again, kind of a narrative progression.
And designed to be something that people want to do versus being forced to sit in their Monday morning lecture and listen to.
Right.
Yeah, capitalize on that desire to engage with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if I had any prognostication, I guess it would be that these sorts of things are going to continue and grow more prominent, and that
Mhm.
might even be to follow up on your earlier question, something that aspiring technical writers might want to look into is collaborating with video creators,
Mhm.
who do all this with graphics,
Yeah.
computer graphics, uh, the little comic type figures that are created graphically, which are essentially just another form of comics.
Mhm. Yeah. All right. So lucky last question. Can we get a sneak peek at what your a preview of what you're working on at the moment, what we should look out for from you in the future?
Well, thank you for the chance to plug. Right now, I'm finishing an article that is introducing a new reading theory of comics. I'd like to see it in one of the journals, maybe about a year from now.
Mhm.
Uh, when my semester is on, I have to put all that aside. But during the holiday break, I want to get back to it and finish it up. And then once that's in print, maybe expand it into a monograph.
Mhm. I'm just laughing because we just finished mid-semester break here. It was my first day back at work today, and I came back to a lot of emails about, I hope you had a great mid-semester break. And I've been grading for a week and a half.
Right, yeah, that's my break too, catching up on
Mhm.
grades.
Wonderful. Well, look, thank you so much. I really appreciate this. I've really enjoyed getting to learn more about your work, and yeah, how you came to this work, where you think it's going next, and to get that deeper dive and different angle on the article. So yeah, thank you again for joining us. I really
It was been my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. Who's your friend?
This is Cyclone Charlie, so named by it was the first of 3 dog trainers that she defeated, as a 6-month-old puppy who'd been returned to the RSPCA twice before she was 5
Oh,
months old. She looks real cute and decorative, but she's chaotic.
mhm.
Yeah, I was trying to dig through my floor, and that's how she earned herself some lap time, and interview presence.
Well, that's a very doggy thing to do.
Isn't it
So,
just? Yes.
yes,
It's the best thing about Zoom, you get to meet everyone's pets.
yeah.